The bones and tusks of mammoths and other animals that had disappeared in some strange primeval catastrophe. These mass extinctions, this tremendous volcanic activity, this rapidity of the melting of the ice seems to suggest some enormous climatic revolution that took place about 12,000 years ago. There seems to be some unknown factor that we can't put our fingers on.
The end of the Ice Age. What made it a revolution? Here's the big question. What brought on cataclysm?
One of the best theories that has been put forward is by an American, Charles Hapgood, who suggested something he called earth crust displacement, which meant that the whole crust of the earth shifted around suddenly like the skin of an orange.
The whole outer shell of the earth, it's only 1/3 of 1% of the earth's mass. Like the a peel of an orange, if it was loose, it moves.
Thinner than an eggshell, the Earth's crust rests on a molten liquid interior. The ruling theory on the Earth's crust is that of plate tectonics, continents slowly drifting apart over hundreds of millions of years. Though science scorned the theory for over half a century, it now equally scorns the notion that the Earth's crust could move as a whole and suddenly. But one scientist was mesmerized by the idea. Had he lived longer, Earth crust displacement would have been considered more seriously. His name was Albert Einstein.
This is a summary of what he said. When I came across Hapgood's work, I was electrified. Here was an idea that was simple, but could explain a whole range of problems.
Hapgood had the theory. The question was, what was the mechanism that set this whole gigantic thing in motion? And it was Einstein who came up with the suggestion. The enormous amount of ice that builds up around the poles can become 2 miles thick, ice that extended right into the middle of the continent of America. And these billions, countless billion tons of ice, if they formed in an imbalanced way, would cause the Earth, as it were, to judder like a wheel with a great weight placed on its rim. This judder would in fact be sufficient to cause that switching of the crust of the Earth.
55,000 years ago, the North Pole lay close to Europe, but suddenly swept to Hudson Bay in Canada. And around 12,500 BC, it suddenly shifted again, almost 2,000 miles to where it lies now. Or is it better to say the lands and seas have been swept across the pole, propelled by a sudden displacement of the Earth's crust? If so, this is one of the things which would have happened at the end of the Ice Age. The displacement propelled America out of the polar zone. The sea to the north of it froze over with a thin sheet only meters thick. The huge old ice sheet over North America, more than a mile thick, suddenly melted in a matter of years.
Now, what's so interesting about the Hapgood-Einstein theory is that it also explains all kinds of other myths quite apart from the myths of flood. There are myths of tremendous earthquakes, volcanic catastrophes, black rain falling from the sky, sudden freeze-ups of whole lands. And you can see that in point of fact this is precisely what would happen if the Earth's crust switched around. Quite suddenly, areas that had previously been freezing would suddenly be switched into hot regions. Things like that flash-frozen mammoth of Siberia. Whole species would be wiped out.
If an Earth crust displacement caused the deluge that destroyed a civilization, where was that civilization? Searchers believe to have found it on the Greek island of Santorini, once destroyed in a huge eruption, or in ancient Troy. The German island of Heligoland almost washed away by the North Sea. They have searched for sunken continents in the Atlantic Ocean, but nothing has been found.
And it's this exact problem that scuppered Plato's Atlantis as an ocean for serious scholars. You see, oceanographers have mapped the floor of the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean, and there's no lost continent. Or is there?
In Plato's account of Atlantis, he describes the island as a vast island continent with mountains in the middle of the real ocean. And the real ocean, of course, is the world ocean. It was only later that we began to divide the ocean up into different parts, calling it Atlantic and Pacific, etc. In reality, the world only has one ocean. The myths from around the world, some of them are very explicit about what happens in the Zen Vesta of the Vedic literature. The island continent is destroyed not only in a deluge, but it is covered in snow and ice. So we're looking for an ice-covered island in the middle of the ocean, and there is a great candidate in Antarctica.
If the North Pole shifted, so must the South Pole. Flem-Ath believes that 12,000 years ago, part of Antarctica lay in temperate zones and could have housed a civilization, lost when the continent was swept into the grip of the pole. It's the explanation he finds for maps which show parts of Antarctica as they lay under ice. Turkish Admiral Piri Reis demonstrates knowledge of Antarctica he shouldn't have had.
We have the cartographic departments of both the Navy and the Air Force saying we have made comparisons of the soundings of salient peaks and mountains. We found them to be in astonishing agreement.
What must be emphasized is that we're not talking about just one map, the Piri Reis map, which could be argued away. We're talking about literally dozens of maps.
For example, the Phineas map of Antarctica is extremely accurate to the general configuration, showing river systems that do exist but weren't known in the 16th century.
We didn't discover Antarctica until around 1800. Yet how could European mapmakers already have charted it? Only, Flem-Ath believes, if they copied it from copies upon copies of maps going back millennia. Information that simply shouldn't be there. It's only over the last 25 years we know that under the ice cap, Antarctica exists of some islands, a continent, a frozen sea in between. Yet the notion is already here on this map.
What I'm saying is that these islands here correspond to this area. And the snowfall pattern through here is very heavy. Virtually none through here. These, which are islands underneath of here, would join together before they joined the mainland. And so there was passage through here for several thousand years. There was probably passage through here that then these were joined. So what it's depicting here is something that I think actually did happen. 8,000 BC, maybe 6,000 BC at the latest. Yeah. We have no way of knowing how that came about except by postulating the existence of a civilization that had some sort of navigational and topographical skills that were only reinvented in our own time.
So, were the beginnings of human civilization more remote than we supposed? You may feel that many elements in this program amount to wild guesses which, taken in isolation, can all be argued away. What I'm suggesting is that if you put these pieces all together like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, you begin to see the emergence of a pattern, like a shape emerging from the mist. A civilization that vanished and was forgotten long before recorded history began.